This is me, Andrew Simpson. I'm one of the librarians at RCSI Library in York Street, and I'm really just going to give you an introduction to citations and really how they're used in the research world a little bit, and some of the tools that are available to you to take a look at them, both from a kind of interest point of view to kind of look at some of the research going on in RCSI, but also as a means of finding further research on topics that you might be looking at. I thought I'd start with the basics of what do we mean by a citation. So, researchers do their work and get it published in various places. Predominantly for RCSI staff, that's going to be in journals such as the Lancet or the New England Journal of Medicine, and lots of specialist journals in the different medical specialties and beyond. So really, when they're submitting work to that, just like writing a college essay or any other piece of work, you're going to include a list of references at the end, citing the people, the works that you've used, and how you've or works that you've referred to. For a number of reasons, again, pretty much the same as doing an essay for an assignment or that sort of thing. You've got to acknowledge what you've used. You want to be able to signpost readers to that work as evidence for your own conclusions, but you're also kind of protecting yourself to acknowledge what it is that you've built on, so that nobody's accusing you of using their work without being clear on it. So I just thought I'd start with an example, which then follow through. So here's an article by some people from the college to do with, it's in the Schizophrenia Bulletin, so to do with neurocognition. So it's been published in Schizophrenia Bulletin. Here's your reference telling you the volume and the number and the page numbers from 2013. And obviously, just like you would expect, right at the end of the article, you'll get a list of all the references which are referred to through the work. So 49 references there, which if you were really interested in this article, you might want to go and read some of those as well, depending on how they're referred to within the body of the article itself. So citations are there anyway as a function of being published, and the reference lists themselves can lead you to other articles. But what many databases now do is also provide you with a list of cited references. So that's kind of the reverse of the reference list. Instead of a list of references at the end of the article that they've used, it's who's cited this article subsequently. So it was published in the same article again. This is the PubMed record for it. It was written in 2013. So hopefully some people have now cited it themselves, included it in their own references. And PubMed does now shows similar articles, which is something slightly different, but it then shows cited by. So it does give you a list of 27 articles in PubMed that cite this particular article. So it's a really useful way especially if you have kind of 2 or 3 key articles that you've found on the topic you're interested in, as well as kind of using that to find subject keywords to use in searches and so on. You could also be looking at the articles that have cited it, because presumably there's something in it that's on a similar topic that they're then trying to build their own research off the back of. So many databases now provide that sort of link, and really what a number of them have done over the years is to go a step further with that, to then use the actual citation numbers to kind of highlight key articles and how they might be, how you might spot the most significant ones, I guess, is a simple way of saying it. So if you were to look at the most significant articles to do with schizophrenia, you could be looking at the ones that have been cited most as being the most important in some sense or other. And what's been done in a number of different places now that we'll be taking a look at is to use that information to then make some more sweeping judgments about different sources. So one way to do that is by looking at the journals that they're published in. And what you could do is just for a particular journal title, look at how many citations each of the articles in that journal have had, look at the average citations, and then make some conclusions about the journal from that. And this is something that started quite a while ago. So a guy called Eugene Garfield in the 1960s started using a card system to start looking at the citations received by different articles in different journals and collating them to create kind of journal impact factors, as he called them, which still exist today, to try and identify which are the main journals that are getting attention, which are the journals that have articles in them that are being cited a lot. Initially, the focus of their use was really for librarians like me to help us decide, well, which journals should we have in our library? This is pre-web days, obviously. So we were subscribing to actual print copies of journals. We still subscribe to journals, but they're largely electronic now, but still cost money. And so the journal impact factors that they came up with were kind of used for that purpose. But very quickly, they were also then looking at which are the best journals. If I'm a specialist in schizophrenia, which journals should I be aiming to publish in? And rankings of journals kind of soon followed that. That kind of leads to a question, I guess, is getting cited good? So most of the time, I think the answer is going to be yes, that if somebody's included you in their list of references, it means, hopefully they've read the published paper, or at least they have skimmed it and know that it's important and want to include it in their work. And so, it's a sign of recognition in some sense, but just a word of warning, I guess, that just being cited isn't necessarily good. They may be citing you to make a different argument, or to point out, has anybody seen this terrible article here? This is what I'm not going to do. Just link to one kind of example here of a completely retracted article. This is the famous Lancet article about MMR from Andrew Wakefield. That's the court cases and all sorts, but it's very well cited. It's got 1,500 or more citations because it's been a significant event in the subject area. So lots of people cite it, but it doesn't mean that you will be proud to have your name on this paper because of how it's been discredited and so on. So retraction, it's well signposted. This is PubMed record, but there'll be lower levels of dismissing of articles that are below that, where that they may be still referencing you for negative reasons rather than positive reasons. So just to really emphasize that numbers aren't enough in themselves. You want them to be used in conjunction with other things. So the kind of journal lists that you can get through things like journal citation reports can show you which journals on average get the most citations, and therefore maybe the ones that you should be trying to publish in. Some people dispute that, but moving on from how they use them to measure journals, they now use them to start to use them to measure people as well. So researchers and their performance, because obviously if you've got a list of articles and the number of times each article's been cited, as well as looking which journal from, you can look at which researchers wrote them and work out an average for all the publications from a particular researcher. And that's what's been increasingly happening, to create different ways of, again, measuring the attention given to a particular researcher, but sometimes then being used as a proxy for quality or significance of a researcher's output. Just my note again at the end there, you still find a huge variation in the number of actual citations that might be received either by an individual or by a journal. So I'm just going to talk through a couple more slides, then we'll have a look at this in action in one of the databases to just give some examples of that. But the words of warning first, I guess, that in looking at the numbers of citations people get, it depends what discipline you're in. So different disciplines will have different conventions in terms of how often they publish, how often they cite, where they cite, and the sort of conventions of that. You have the problem of counting self-citations. So people will often quite legitimately cite their previous work because they're building on it and they want to mention it in their new work. But is that a sign of approval as well? Can you approve yourself? So that was the difficulty with it. Citations can obviously take time to appear. Somebody has to have read your published work, which may well be published a year after you actually wrote it. They've then got to do their own research and add in your citation. So citations can have a lag. It takes a while for them to appear. So, there's, and again, that may vary a lot by the subject discipline. So that kind of is another difficulty with using citations as a kind of measure. And the last one there, are all authors equal? So I don't mean this as a personal insult to authors, but just in terms of when you're looking at a particular article, how do you know what part different researchers played? So, this one is actually presented as being by a group, but if you look in the citation databases, they list all of these authors as the author of this article. So if this article performs well, is that reflective of all 200 of them, or however many there are? That equally there are conventions within different disciplines about, the primary author do you list the primary author first? In some disciplines, they'd list them last. In some disciplines, they'd list them second in the list of authors. And most academic journal articles will have kind of, between up to a dozen authors anyway. Certainly the hundreds of authors is more unusual, but does happen with kind of big multi-center kind of experiments that go on. So there's lots of issues with how to tackle citation measurement, basically. So there should be kind of a hesitation in putting too much emphasis on them. Having said that, the databases we're about to look at do provide mitigation to try and tackle some of these points. I think the final one is the one that's still not really been tackled, of different databases, different authors having kind of different roles and finding a way to do that. So where do we look? So the two main sources that are available to you as RCSI students and staff are Web of Science and Scopus. So both of these are on the library's list of databases. We subscribe to them, so you will need an RCSI login, but you can get into these. So Web of Science is really the original one that I mentioned Eugene Garfield earlier, created in the 1960s, Science Citation Index and Journal Citation Reports and several different citation indexes. So it's very authoritative. It's there to be used the same as ever. Scopus was created in 2004 by Elsevier, which is kind of the biggest academic science publisher in the world, and it's really a kind of imitation of Web of Science in what it's aiming to do, but includes a slightly different set of journals. So one of the key things is each database is based on a set of data. They decide which journals they're going to include. So do they look at The Lancet? Do they look at New England Journal? Do they look at Journal of Advanced Nursing and so on? They'll have a list of which journals they include. And Scopus and Web of Science have a big overlap in terms of what they cover, but there will be some differences. I'm going to show you Scopus today. Scopus is well used within RCSI in terms of assessments and kind of information about ourselves. So Scopus is used as a source by many of the rankings agencies out there, and RCSI as well will also quite often go to the Scopus database as a kind of source of, well, how much has RCSI published in 2019, and Scopus would be the kind of main source that the management RCSI would go to as kind of getting a real figure for that kind of statistic. Just a mention of two alternative sources there at the bottom. Google Scholar you've probably come across already, and Dimensions you may not have done. Both are freely available out on the web, and both do show you citations by people. I guess my word of warning would just be neither of them define what they're looking at. That doesn't sound too simplistic. So whether Science and Scopus, as I say, have a list of which journals they're covering. Google Scholar and Dimensions don't, or at least not that they provide. They gather as much information as they can, and they show you as much as they can, but it's slightly less verifiable, I guess, in terms of knowing exactly what content is being covered. I'm going to go into Scopus now, and so we can just start to have a look at the practice rather than just talking about it in general terms. So you can get into Scopus from the A to Z of our resources that Niall will have mentioned in the session a couple of weeks ago, libguides.rcsi.ie. I'll just use the link here because I've already clicked on it. You'll need to enter your RCSI username and password. And so I'm just going into the Scopus database here. So I'm assuming most of you will have attended Niall's one, so you'll have seen some of these sorts of databases. Scopus here is a very general database. I think I've got a slide here just to give you an idea. So Medline, or PubMed, is a database of about 24 million articles from various medical related journals. Scopus is a much more general academic database, so 77 million records, so it's about 3 times as big, but it's covering kind of arts and humanities, social sciences. It is a good source if you're looking for kind of more social science or management journals. It does cover that sort of content quite well, but in general it's just trying to cover every kind of academic topic. So you can use it as a search just to find journal articles. So I can look for something on cochlear implants and just do a general search, and it'll come up with a list of documents for me, 18,000 of them on cochlear implants. So in a general sense, you can use it in the same way as other databases. You can search within results, do searches and use different techniques. So, you know, I could go within this and just look for stuff about, say, children or infants, and then search within 18,000 get down to a smaller number. So you can use it as a normal databases. Databases is basically what I'm saying. Just get those results up. But the thing that makes it slightly more unique is the citations. So you can see on this right-hand side, for every article, it shows you the number of articles that it's been cited by, and you can sort by this if you want. So having done a subject search, I could decide to just sort it by which have had the most citations, and then it's not going too slowly, it'll tell me. So here's the top one on cochlear implants and children and infants. It's a position statement here from the journal Pediatrics, and it's been cited over 1,000 times. So this just gives you a way of saying, well, if you already knew about this statement, maybe you want to see who has cited it, you've got it there, you can click on it and it will give you that set of results of 1,000 documents that have cited that document. So you can kind of build up a set of results and you know, find your way through from one document to many others. Okay, So it really gives you a lot more to go on. The other thing you can do is, if you're particularly interested in this document, you could look at some more citation information about it. So if I just get this up. So it gives you metric details about this single article in Pediatrics from 2007, shows you when the citations occurred. You can combat the problem of self-citations and exclude those if you want to. You could change the years and say, well, actually, I want to go back further than that, and update your graph. And, you're starting to get into different metrics about the citation. I'm not going to go into detail about these sorts of measures, but again, they're the sorts of things that you can use to compare a particular article with others. The other thing you can do within Scopus, and really the heart of what I've just been talking about with about individuals, is look for an individual. So, for instance, I could do a search for Fergal O'Brien. Royal College of Surgeons. So I've just chosen the author search. I've put in what I know, and it gives me possible answers. Here's Fergal O'Brien with some odd extras because of the apostrophe there that it's not quite sure how to deal with. But it is Fergal O'Brien. It does say Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and this is a kind of summary author page now, which you could have got to by finding a single article by him and just clicking on his name. But it's the same page that you get to. So there's 252 documents by Fergal O'Brien. They've been cited 13,000 times by 9,000 documents. So some of these cite more than one of his works. And then it says H-index 60. So I just wanted to mention that H-index is a particular important one. There are various metrics that are used about researchers as ways of trying to assess them really and look at their publishing performance. So, the basics would be how many articles have you published, or how many works have you published, how many times have they been cited, and possibly then calculating an average on that. Sometimes researchers will be asked what journals they published in, and going back to my earlier slides, the kind of impact factor is quite often asked for, about which journals have been published in and what was the impact factor of the journal, so the average for the journal. Increasingly, they look at top citation percentile, so rather than just how many times you've been cited, it's how does that compare in a ranking of 1 to 100 of people in a similar subject area, or maybe articles of a similar age. Where do you rank from 1 to 100? But then H-index is kind of predominant really in recent years as a kind of measure for individuals. And H-index is really just a single number, and it's the number of articles that you've published with that same number of citations. So I've given an example here just because sometimes people can't get their heads around it. But basically, as an example, if you had 3 articles published, and so far they've been cited 5 times for one time for a second, 3 times for a third, your H-index would be 1, because the highest number that you've got is of number of articles published and cited for each of them is 1. That has you've got 1 article that's been cited once, but you haven't got 2 articles that have both been cited twice. That changes if your citations go up. So in bullet 2 there, you've now got citations of 7, 4, and 18 for your 3 papers. So they've all been cited more than 3 times. So your H-index is now 3. It can't be more than 3 because you've only published 3 papers. Okay, so if you did publish a 4th paper, your H-index could go up if that 4th paper then gets cited 4 times or more. You'll then have 4 papers that have been cited 4 times or more, so your H-index will be 4. So it kind of makes sense. H-index, it does depend on the source. So you can have your H-index that Scopus shows you, as we've just seen with Fergal. He had an H-index of 60, which is very high in Scopus. But if we looked it up in Web of Science, I think I looked earlier and it was 57 or something like that. It was slightly different. And again, Google Scholar may give you a different figure again. Why are they different figures? Because they're looking at different sets of publications. Okay, so Scopus covers a certain list of journals, Web of Science different, Google Scholar different again, so we don't know what it is. So they can only base their calculation on the data that they've got. One of the problems with H-index is it can never go down. So it's counting how many, the citations you've had, and you can't lose citations. You can't have articles unpublished generally, unless you're Andrew Wakefield. But so your H-index is only ever going to go up. So even in death, your H-index will just keep rising. So what they start to do now is just look at H-index for a limited period. So the H5 index is quite common, which is kind of looking just at the last 5 years. How many papers have you published in the last 5 years? How many citations have they had in that time? And calculating it based on that. So H-index has become very important. Here it is in Fergal's one. You can go into more details within Scopus and just look at the breakdown. So lots of fun stuff. You can change your years that it's looking at. You can exclude the self-citations if you want to. It shows you exactly which documents it's counting and how many citations they've got. So if you want to pour into the detail, you can do. So, especially for researchers looking at themselves maybe and understanding what's been happening, this is a really useful tool. Lots of additional stuff then comes into it. So you can see when the citations have occurred, which year they've occurred. You can look at co-authors, so you can see who he's most published with. And you can do things by, by subject, by source. So, here's the journals that he's published in, the type of publications, so just kind of whether it's an original article or a review or an editorial, and by subject and so on. And there's lots more that you can dig into. And the one of the nice things about Scopus is anything that you look at is then a set of documents. So you could pull out the people that have cited him within a certain criteria, and then kind of again look at metrics to do with that set of documents. So there's lots that you can explore, and there's nothing that can go wrong. It's really just another way of digging into your topic, or the people that are, the main researchers in your topic. So you may do a subject search and find out who the key researchers are, and then look at them in more detail through this kind of analysis to see who they work with, where they publish, where they've been cited, and so on. So just to finish with, I was going to mention some of the other, I have mentioned some of the problems already, but metrics can only tell you so much. So they're measuring from a set of data, they're doing it in a mechanical way. So, you can only get so much from metrics. I think H-index in particular has become slightly over-important. It's only one measure of somebody's performance. And so, there's starting to be kind of moves towards other measures to make sure that it's not too mechanized, it's not too league table based in terms of how we actually assess researchers and appoint people to posts and all that sort of thing. So, the general message would be metrics are a useful tool. They only tell you so much, and you should use several of them in combination with some qualitative kind of assessment and, alongside it. So, if you're just relying on numbers, then gaming can occur. So people can cite themselves, journals can cite themselves and try and kind of improve their impact factors, and that sort of thing has gone on in the past. So many funders now, who are the ones assessing researchers for their research grants, are supporting moves away from too much relies on metrics generally, but in particular, they're focused on moving away from looking at which journal a researcher has published in. So habitually, it may be that researchers kind of say, well, I've had 3 articles in Nature and 2 in the Lancet, and that would be seen as very good because the Lancet and Nature both have very high impact factors. But they're trying to move the emphasis to say, well, what about the actual content of the article, wherever it was published? Can we assess the quality of the article rather than which journal it was published in? So I've provided links there to Dora and the Leiden Manifesto, but you can find them easily online. They're both kind of movements towards moving away from any kind of assessment of which journal it is that you've published in towards kind of assessment of the quality. So really the type of thing that they're looking to replace it with is more of an opportunity for researchers to describe the impact their research has had in various ways. And on Monday, I think it is, there'll be a talk available to you from Bibliometrics, who provide a different software tool that I haven't shown today, which provides different sorts of metrics around publishing. So instead of just measuring whether people have cited you, it looks at mentions of publications in social media, in news items, in policy documents, and all sorts of things like that. So look out for that on Monday, because it kind of does provide a different way, moving away from citations to see other ways that research impacts might be demonstrated. Just to mention, if you're interested in these sorts of topics, we have more available on our research support LibGuide, which is available at that link. And we're always happy to take questions about it. So part of the service the library provides is to researchers as well as to students, and we support them with search queries, similar to what a lot of you are doing at the moment, but also with these kind of topics to do with bibliometrics and some of the tools like Scopus, SciVal, which is another more detailed analytics tool, and Altmetrics, which you'll have an opportunity to see next week. So feel free to get in touch if you do have questions. But I'm happy to take any questions now if you have them.
Thank you very much for your talk, Andrew. I'm sure many students will find this of great use while they're doing their research. And as Andrew mentioned, on Monday we do have a session with the Altmetrics on an Altmetrics talk on Monday, and we will be advertising that through our social media, so stay tuned. And we will be talking or learning from Andrew again next Thursday at 3 p.m. Irish Standard Time. So we look forward to seeing you all on Monday and on Thursday. Thank you again for attending, and thank you, Andrew, for facilitating this session.
No problem.